Hi, I'm Scott Strohmeyer. I'm a senior sales engineer at Nutanix, and I'm going to walk through some of the cool new features that have been built into disaster recovery in Prism Central for Nutanix version 5.17. So 5.17 builds in Prism Central a lot more features and functionality than what we've seen previously. The features that you're used to seeing in Prism Element under data protection are still there, but there's a lot of great changes that I'm going to walk through here. First, in order to take advantage of these features, one of the things we'll need to do is categorize the virtual machines that we have. So I'm going to go into categories here. I already created a DR category placeholder here. I've got one for full sync or synchronous replication, and then Nearsync. I'll explain those a little bit later. But what I'm going to do now is assign some virtual machines to one of those categories, and then we can get moving with setting it up. So pick all of these except for that guy and that guy. Put that in categories. Give it my DR category. Do Nearsync. Add. And now that I have my categories created, next thing I need to do is add a recovery site. So I'm going to be creating a availability zone. The availability zone is going to be this second Prism Central instance over here. This is in the same general area. It's not underneath the other one in the rack, but they're close enough that you could call them the metro availability. And that's what you really want when you're going for very low RPOs, such as 1 minute or even 0 RPO. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this other system as a availability zone. Note that you've got options here. You've got Xi, which is our cloud-based solution, and then you've got physical location. These two guys connected up here. Pause the video while that goes up. Oh, pretty quick. Okay, so it'll show up. So see, that's 186. We're on 209 here. And if I go over here, down to administration, availability zones, and we see the other side. So we've got the availability zones configured. Now we can move on to the next step. Next step here is going to be setting up a protection policy. Now, the protection policy is where that category of the virtual machine comes in. And this is an important one. So I'm going to give this just a simple name. Pick our cluster. I'm going to send it to that other location. So look at our default here is 1 hour for asynchronous, but I want to do Nearsync. I want this fast. So I'm going to set this to 1 minute RPO. And note that it has a retention policy here. So you have an option of linear. Of course, that's disabled for doing this. It defaults to a roll-up. And this is really cool because this allows you to define a retention policy that makes more sense. Because one of the things you got to keep in mind is that when you're running Nearsync, it's snapshotting every minute. If it's synchronous, it's just streaming whatever data changes to the other location. So it doesn't really make any sense to have a snapshot for every minute. So the remote retention policy helps you define this. So for every 15 minute, we'll have an hourly recovery point, which is great because maybe I want to be able to go back in time. Maybe I've got systems where I've got situations where people, they need to go back a couple weeks, months, whatever you want to set there. The other thing that's worth pointing out is the app consistent recovery point. So folks that have used this in Prism Element will probably recognize this. So what I'm going to do here is add my category. Put in that DR Nearsync category, hit save. Hit save on that. And what it'll do is start replicating over the data, and I'll pause the video for a few minutes so it can start staging the data and copying it over. All right, we can take a look at our alerts here. It'll tell us which entities have been replicated. So of course, since I was just starting all that, that's a full replication, and we can see where they've gone to a higher frequency snapshot. Total time for that didn't take very long. I was able to set everything up pretty quickly, looks like in about 10 minutes. So now that we have a working protection policy, let's start looking into setting up and running a recovery plan. So we just hit create, pick the AZ that we added earlier, give it a name and a description. So if you're not used to using recovery plans, this is where things really start to get different from the way that data protection works in Prism Element. In Prism Central, we have the ability to set up a order of operations for our recovery plans. This allows me to do things like decide when systems should start up. I can add scripting and so forth. And so in this example, I'm going to fire up my databases first. So I'll add those. They'll become the first stage. I'll add a new stage here. I'll add my server systems. And then finally, I'll add my desktops to the final stage here. So a couple things that are worth pointing out here is that you can add a delay if you need to. Another thing you can do is you can enable scripts for your virtual machines here. So if you need to run a script against the virtual machine before it fires up, you can do that. I'm not going to do that though. You just hit next. This will explain the network mapping. So you have the ability to use a production network if you're going to do a planned or unplanned failover, and then of course you can also use a test network. Same thing goes for going back if you want to fail back to your primary location from your recovery location. One of the other things that's new here is the ability to specify a IP address. You can change the IP addresses of the virtual machines if you need to. So we're going to define our production networks on our local AZ, and then we're going to do the same thing for our failover. Note that we have the option to do test going in both directions, as well as production. Of course, production is what you use if we do real world scenario failover. Also, if you punch in different gateway IPs and subnet lengths and that sort of thing, you'll have the option to use advanced settings, which will let you change the IP addresses of the virtual machines. So this is something that's new. It's a new feature that allows you to go in, you can actually change the IP addresses on a per virtual machine basis when you're doing your failover. So very useful in situations where the failover location network is not the same as the original. But I'm not going to do that because we're just going to do a test here. Don't want it to take too long, so go ahead and hit done. That creates our little plan here. And if we look over at the other cluster, of course that one's complaining about licensing too. Don't need to worry about that. We can go into recovery plans, and what we'll see is that it's created the same demo recovery plan over here. So one of the things that I want to show before we do the failover is I want to show the speed of the RPO here. So the RPO is set to 1 minute. So I'm coming back to my source setup here, and I'm going to go into one of these VMs here, and I'm going to launch the console and just make a real obvious change here so that we have some idea that the failover worked and that the data was replicated the way we expected it to be. And for simplicity's sake, I think we'll just change the wallpaper here on this virtual machine. And we'll maybe create a text file or something like that. So change the wallpaper. Nice looking picture of a beachfront here. Close out Server Manager. And let's just create a text document. Call that test. So what should happen here is when this all comes back up on the other side after I execute the failover plan, these changes should come along with this virtual machine. So now I'm going to come over here, the other side of my recovery setup here onto my other AZ. All right, going from primary to this one. Let's do a planned failover. This will probably yell about licensing, but no big deal. I'll pause the video for a sec as this takes a minute. Oh, there it is. Yep, yelling about licensing. Execute anyway. All right. Now it's going to kick off that process. We can actually watch it do its thing. Go into View All Tasks. Let it kick off, and it looks like it's done. Let's go back a couple pages here. Lots of tasks. Find where we kicked this off here. Let's see here. Okay, so 5:24 p.m. Back. Looks like everything was rocking and rolling by about 4 minutes later. So let's jump into our VMs list. There it is. They're all on and running. Take a look at my SQL Server VM, the one that we changed the wallpaper on. Log into this guy. Okay, yep. So we did the power plug restart. All right, there's my test file. Wallpaper's changed, so changes came over just fine. And it looks like it worked. So I really wanted to get an idea of how fast we could do a failover. We took a look at the RPO and RTO together, and with the RPO set to 0, I think we can do a pretty fast failover. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to use this stopwatch, and then I'm going to put a file on this CentOS machine. That file, because we're at RPO 0, should show up immediately once we do the failover. So we're going to test both the ability to get this information into the system and then see the information show up on the other side. So this is just going to be this little text file here. We're going to call it hello text. So there it is. And so now we're going to go start the stopwatch here. Come over to our other Prism Central, and we're going to execute the failover plan. So this is our other AZ that we set up earlier in the video. So hit failover, go ahead and hit unplanned failover. That's okay because it's going to a separate network. Hit the button. I feel like that should be a really big red button, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. So wait a minute here for the failover to kick off. Okay, looks like it is initiated successfully. So now we're just going to sit here and wait for the recovery plan to do its thing. So we'll see a lot of tasks kicking off all at once here. We'll have a whole lot of things running in the background. It's going to restore from the recovery point. It'll create the entity. The virtual machine looks like it should already be available. Yep, looks like it is. It's attaching the virtual machine to Nutanix now. Remember, this is the failover availability zone. list here. Looks like it's still loading. Should kick off the power on operation. Sometimes if things lag a little bit in the interface, I'll reload the page, especially since we're doing a bit of a drag race here. We want to see this do its thing and see how fast it gets it done. So it looks like, yeah, okay, so that should probably, yeah. All right, so this will be available in a couple of seconds here. All right, let's reload the interface here. And looks like it's firing up. Yep, there we go. CentOS is booting. Okay, logging in. All right, there's our file.